You are eating wrong. I know that sounds bold coming from someone who can't even smell your lunch, but hear me out. Everything you think of as normal food, your sandwiches, your smoothies, your suspiciously orange cheese, is an absolute historical anomaly. For 99% of human existence, none of that existed. And yet, somehow, our ancestors not only survived but built civilizations, crossed continents, and had enough energy left over to invent war. So, what were they actually eating? And more importantly, could you do it? Let's find out. First, we need to establish something important. Ancient humans is not one thing. We're talking about a span of roughly 2.5 million years, across every continent on Earth, in environments ranging from frozen tundra to scorching desert to dense jungle. Saying ancient humans ate X is like saying modern humans like music. Technically true, wildly unhelpful. So instead of giving you one neat answer, we're going to travel through time, stopping at key moments in human dietary history. And things are going to get weird. Delightfully, uncomfortably weird. Let's start at the very beginning. 2.5 million years ago, our earliest ancestors, genus Homo, fresh on the scene, were not the dominant predators they'd eventually become. They were, to be honest, kind of pathetic by nature's standards. No claws, no venom, no impressive speed. What they had was a big brain, opposable thumbs, and a desperate need to not get eaten while also finding something to eat. Their diet was primarily opportunistic. That means they ate whatever was available and whatever wouldn't kill them immediately. Roots, tubers, berries, leaves, seeds, insects, eggs stolen from nests, and the occasional small animal they managed to catch or scavenge. The word scavenge is key here. Early Homo species were not apex predators. They were the guys showing up after the lion had finished its meal, nervously looking around and grabbing whatever was left. Here's the wild part, though, that scavenged meat mattered enormously, bone marrow specifically. When the big predators were done with a carcass, the early humans would smash the bones with stones to extract the marrow inside. Bone marrow is extraordinarily calorie-dense and rich in fat. It's like the original energy drink. Scientists believe this shift toward fat-rich, calorie-dense food is part of what fueled the expansion of the human brain over hundreds of thousands of years. So, in a very real sense, your ability to read this sentence right now is partly thanks to some ancestor desperately cracking open a leftover lion carcass on a hot African savanna. Elegant. Now let's talk about something that changed everything. Fire. The control of fire, which early humans developed somewhere between 1.5 million and 400,000 years ago, depending on the evidence you trust, is probably the single most important culinary innovation in human history. More important than the refrigerator. More important than the microwave. More important than whatever artisanal toast trend is happening right now. Before fire, everything was raw. Raw meat. Raw tubers. Raw whatever you could find. Digesting raw food takes enormous energy. Your gut has to work incredibly hard to break it down, which is why other great apes like gorillas spend literally half their day eating and the other half digesting. They don't have much time left for anything else, like, say, developing complex language or building tools or writing scripts about food. Cooking changed the chemistry. Heat breaks down the tough cellular walls in plants and denatures proteins in meat, making nutrients dramatically easier to absorb. When humans started cooking, they got more energy from the same amount of food. That freed up calories to fuel a bigger brain and freed up time to do things other than eat constantly. Cooking didn't just change what humans ate, it changed what humans were. Imagine explaining to your body that the reason you can think complex thoughts is because a distant ancestor figured out that fire makes food taste better. Life is absurd. Fast forward to roughly 300,000 years ago. We're in the era of Homo sapiens and our close cousin, the Neanderthals. And here's where the dietary picture becomes genuinely fascinating. Neanderthals, who lived across Europe and parts of Asia, ate a diet that was incredibly heavy in animal protein. We know this from isotopic analysis of their bones. Scientists can actually look at the chemical signatures preserved in ancient teeth and bones and determine what kinds of foods a person ate regularly. Neanderthal isotope data suggests they were eating large game almost constantly. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, reindeer, horses. They were, essentially, dedicated megafauna hunters. But here's something surprising. There's also evidence that Neanderthals cooked plants. Dental calculus, that's the hardened plaque on ancient teeth, which is disgusting but scientifically invaluable, has been analyzed and found to contain cooked starch grains and plant material. Neanderthals weren't just eating steak. They were apparently roasting plants too. Some researchers have even suggested they used medicinal plants, which means Neanderthals might have had the earliest version of a home remedy cabinet. Chew on that. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens across Africa and elsewhere were eating a broader, more flexible diet. And that flexibility, many scientists argue, is part of why we're here, and Neanderthals aren't. When the climate shifted, when the megafauna disappeared, the generalists survived. The specialists struggled. The lesson from 300,000 years ago: don't be too picky. A lesson many of us clearly haven't learned, given modern menu anxiety. Now we're going to talk about the Ice Age, because nothing says challenging food environment like an entire planet partly covered in glaciers. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, huge portions of Europe, Asia, and North America were either frozen or extremely cold. The people living through this were our direct ancestors, and they were eating in some of the most demanding conditions human beings have ever faced. In these environments, the diet was heavily animal-based out of pure necessity. Plants don't grow well under ice. So the humans living in glaciated or periglacial regions were eating large quantities of animal fat and protein: mammoths, reindeer, bison, fish, birds, whatever they could hunt and store. Fat was especially prized, not just because it tastes good, though it does, but because fat provides more than twice the calories per gram compared to protein or carbohydrates. In extreme cold, your body burns calories at an accelerated rate just to stay warm. Fat is survival. Archaeological sites from this period show something remarkable. The bones of hunted animals show signs of extremely thorough processing. People weren't just eating the obvious cuts of meat, they were cracking every bone, boiling carcasses to extract every last calorie, eating the brain, the organs, the tongue, the marrow. Nothing was wasted. If you've ever felt vaguely guilty about throwing away leftovers, imagine how Ice Age humans would react to your behavior. But here's something almost poetic. Even in these harsh conditions, people found ways to eat that went beyond pure survival. There's evidence of food storage, of careful hunting strategies, and eventually, of communal feasting. Humans weren't just eating to survive. They were eating together. The social dimension of food, the idea that meals are about more than calories, appears to be ancient and deeply embedded in our nature. Your instinct to order extra appetizers when friends come over? Entirely prehistoric. Let's shift to a warmer, greener scene, because not all ancient humans were living on ice. In tropical and subtropical regions across Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America, ancient humans were living in environments of extraordinary abundance. Forests full of fruit, rivers full of fish, coastlines rich with shellfish and seaweed, and an incredible diversity of edible plants. Coastal and riverine populations in particular had remarkable access to nutrition. Shellfish middens, basically ancient trash heaps made mostly of discarded shells, found along coastlines around the world, tell us that shellfish were a crucial food source for coastal peoples for tens of thousands of years. And shellfish are nutritionally dense in ways that matter: zinc, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin B12, iodine. These nutrients support brain function and neurological development. Some researchers have proposed the coastal migration theory, suggesting that access to shellfish-rich coastlines may have helped support the cognitive development of early Homo sapiens as they migrated out of Africa. You might be eating sushi with thousands of years of legitimacy behind you. Feel better about it. Tropical forest dwellers had access to an enormous variety of plant foods, including wild fruits that were often far more flavorful and nutritious than the domesticated versions we eat today. Wild fruits tend to be smaller, denser, and more intensely flavored because they haven't been selectively bred for size and shelf life. The wild banana, before thousands of years of cultivation, was a small, starchy fruit full of seeds. Almost nothing like the smooth yellow thing you're probably picturing. Most wild plants are more nutritionally complex than their farmed descendants, which is a mildly depressing fact to sit with. Insects. We need to talk about insects. Because if you're eating like an ancient human, you're eating bugs. There's really no way around it. Insects have been a significant food source for humans across nearly every culture in history, on every continent except Antarctica, which, to be fair, has limited options for everyone. They are extraordinarily nutritious. Crickets, for example, are roughly 65% protein by dry weight, rich in healthy fats, and packed with micronutrients like iron, zinc, and calcium. Termites are fatty and calorie-dense. Beetle larvae are a protein and fat powerhouse. In many parts of the world, eating insects has never stopped being completely normal. But in Western cultures, there's a strong aversion to it that developed relatively recently and is mostly cultural rather than biological. Your disgust at the idea of eating a cricket is not ancient or instinctual. It's a learned response, probably about 1,000 years old at most. Meanwhile, humans eating insects is probably 2 million years old. Ancient humans weren't just tolerating insects as food, they were actively seeking them out, digging for grubs, raiding termite mounds, behavior you can still observe in non-human great apes today, gathering caterpillars in season. In many environments, insects were among the most reliable, abundant, and energy-efficient food sources available. They didn't require hunting or complex tools. You could gather an enormous quantity of protein in a short amount of time. So next time someone at a trendy restaurant offers you a cricket taco and you hesitate, just know, your hesitation is the historical anomaly. The cricket is the classic dish. Let's talk about plants more specifically, because the plant knowledge of ancient humans was extraordinary, and we should not underestimate it. Forager communities, people living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which is how all humans lived for the vast majority of our existence, typically had detailed working knowledge of hundreds of plant species. Which roots were edible, which were poisonous, which were medicinal, which tasted good raw versus cooked, which were only edible at certain times of year. This wasn't vague general knowledge. This was encyclopedic, practically inherited, and updated continuously through experience. The variety of plant foods consumed by foraging communities is genuinely staggering compared to modern diets. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, like the Hadza of Tanzania, who have been extensively studied, show them consuming anywhere from 50 to over 100 different plant species throughout the year. The average modern Western diet relies on a tiny number of staple crops and their processed derivatives. We have narrowed the human food experience dramatically. Starchy tubers deserve special mention here. Tubers, underground storage organs of plants like the wild ancestors of potatoes and yams, were likely a critical calorie source for humans throughout much of our evolutionary history. They're available year-round in many environments. They're storable, they're calorie-dense, and cooking makes them highly digestible. The starchy tuber hypothesis in paleoanthropology suggests that access to cooked tubers may have been particularly important in supporting brain development, because glucose, the sugar the brain runs on, is exactly what cooked starch provides. Your brain might owe its existence partly to something resembling a potato. Respect the potato. Then, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, everything changed. The Neolithic Revolution, the shift from foraging to farming, is one of the most consequential transitions in human history. Humans began cultivating plants, selectively growing the ones with the most useful traits, and domesticating animals. This wasn't a single event. It happened independently in multiple places around the world. The Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, the Yangtze and Yellow River valleys in China, Mesoamerica, New Guinea, West Africa, the Andes. And interestingly, from a strict health and dietary diversity standpoint, early farming was in many ways a step down from foraging. Early agricultural skeletons show more evidence of nutritional deficiencies, less variety in the diet, more reliance on a few staple crops, more tooth decay from starchy diets, shorter stature in some populations. Farming made food more reliable and supported larger populations, but it didn't necessarily make individual diets richer. What early farmers in the Fertile Crescent were eating looked something like this: emmer wheat, einkorn wheat, barley, lentils, peas, chickpeas, and bitter vetch. Mostly these early domesticated grains and legumes. Animal protein came from newly domesticated sheep, goats, and pigs, plus hunting. It was nutritionally workable but modest. Very few vegetables as we'd recognize them, virtually no fruit except what grew wild nearby, and a quality of grain that was dramatically more nutritious than the refined flour products those grains eventually became. Meanwhile, early farmers in China were cultivating rice and millet, eating river fish, pigs, and dogs. In Mesoamerica, the diet revolved around maize, squash, and beans. The Three Sisters, a combination that works beautifully from a nutritional standpoint because the amino acid profiles of maize and beans complement each other. Indigenous agricultural knowledge, in other words, was sophisticated enough to engineer nutritional synergy thousands of years before the concept of amino acids existed. That's quietly incredible. Fermentation. You knew we were getting here. Long before anyone understood what bacteria or yeast were, humans figured out that certain foods left under the right conditions for the right amount of time became something different and interesting, better tasting, longer lasting, sometimes intoxicating. Fermented foods appear in the archaeological record across ancient cultures with remarkable consistency. Beer brewing evidence in the Fertile Crescent dates back over 13,000 years. Residue from fermented grape products has been found in clay pots in Georgia, dating to around 8,000 years ago. Ancient Chinese vessels show evidence of a fermented beverage made from rice, honey, and fruit as far back as 9,000 years ago. Fermented fish sauces were staples across the ancient Mediterranean and Southeast Asia. Fermentation was not just about taste or getting mildly intoxicated, though those are admittedly compelling reasons. It was also about food safety and nutrition. Fermenting vegetables like cabbage, as in traditional sauerkraut, produces vitamin C, which prevents scurvy. Fermenting grains and legumes breaks down anti-nutritional compounds called phytates that would otherwise reduce mineral absorption. Fermented dairy like yogurt and cheese provided protein and fat in a form that was easier to digest than fresh milk, especially for the majority of the world's population that couldn't digest lactose as adults. Ancient humans were practicing food science without the lab coat, and honestly, arguably more effectively. Let's talk about ancient condiments and flavor, because the idea that ancient humans just ate bland survival food is completely wrong. Salt has been harvested and traded since prehistoric times, with salt trade routes predating most written records. Ancient Egyptians used salt so heavily in food preservation that they essentially built their food supply around it. The word salary comes from the Latin salarium, related to salt, because Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt. That's how valuable it was. Your instinct to salt your food is literally ancient enough to have shaped ancient economies. Herbs and spices were gathered and used far before any civilization thought to write it down. Pollen and plant residue found at ancient sites suggests the deliberate use of aromatic plants in cooking going back tens of thousands of years. Wild garlic, mustard seeds, coriander, cumin, mint, these flavors weren't modern inventions. They were ancient preferences that got formalized as civilizations developed trade routes for spices. In Mesopotamia, some of the oldest written recipes, clay tablets from around 4,000 years ago, describe complex dishes with layered flavors, slow-cooked meat dishes with leeks, garlic, onions, and herbs, broth-based preparations, dishes recognizable as cuisines, not just sustenance. Ancient humans were not just surviving. They were cooking in ways that revealed genuine culinary ambition. Now, let's bring all of this together and ask the honest question. What would happen if you tried to eat like an ancient human, genuinely? If you tried to replicate a realistic ancient human diet for a month, here's what that would involve. Early mornings gathering whatever wild plants were in season. Long periods of physical activity with no guarantee of a meal at the end. When food was available, eating large quantities because tomorrow was uncertain. A diet vastly more varied in plant species than you're used to, but also irregular in protein availability. High intake of fiber, almost no refined sugar, no processed anything. Significant amounts of organ meat if you were in a hunting community. Possible insect consumption. Fermented food in various forms. Water that was sometimes risky to drink. In terms of macronutrients, ancient diets were probably not as dramatically different from modern nutritional ideals as people think. The idea that ancient humans ate almost exclusively meat, for example, the basis of some modern dietary trends, is not well supported by the full archaeological and anthropological record. Most ancient humans across most of time ate a mixed diet. The balance shifted depending on season and geography, but outright carnivory was a specialized adaptation to specific extreme environments, not a human universal. What ancient diets had that modern diets dramatically lack? Variety, fiber, fermented foods, unprocessed whole foods, and the metabolic experience of occasionally not eating. What modern diets have that ancient humans would have found extraordinary? Reliability, safety from contamination, and access to caloric abundance that would have seemed almost supernatural to someone who had ever gone hungry. Here's the part that should probably make you think. The human body you are currently living in was shaped by millions of years of eating in the ways we've been describing. your digestive system, your taste preferences, your cravings for fat and sugar and salt, your gut microbiome, all of it is calibrated to an eating environment that no longer exists. You crave sugar because, for most of human history, sweet things meant ripe fruit, which meant safe calories. You crave fat because fat meant survival through lean seasons. You crave salt because salt is genuinely necessary and historically scarce. In the modern food environment, every single one of these ancient instincts is exploited constantly and commercially. The food industry didn't invent your cravings, they just figured out how to aim them at products that deliver the sensory signal without the nutritional substance. A bag of chips gives you the salt and fat signal your ancient brain recognizes as important resource, without providing the actual nutrients that signal was designed to detect. Your brain is running ancient software in a world it was not designed for. Which explains a lot, really.